very much. And again, welcome everyone. It's lovely to have you here this evening for tonight's Institute of Historical Research, Transport and Mobility History seminar. As I've noted, we're recording tonight's session for posterity. We would ask if you could keep on mute during the presentation itself. There will be a chance to ask questions at the end, and you're more than welcome to use the chat function as well to ask questions as we go, which we will try and keep track of and ask when the time comes. My name is Mike Asbester. I'm one of the co-conveners of the seminar series, and Charlotte Matheson is on the controls this evening. For information, the next seminar will take place on the 29th of April. The speaker and topic to be confirmed, but we are working on the programme for next term at the moment, and we will let people know in the variety of usual sorts of means that we do. So keep an eye out on email via the Railway Studies and Transport History JISC mail lists, the Global Mobilities lists, and through Twitter and other means. Tonight, though, we are delighted to welcome Mike Rogers from the National Archives of the UK to discuss the Land Transport Archives Network, a new initiative that he is convening and has been setting up. I'm not going to say too much about that, in fact anything more than that, because Mike's going to tell us a bit about that, other than to say at this point, this is a chance for us all to find out a bit more about what's been done so far, the plans for the future, to ask questions and indeed to make suggestions and get involved and so on. I'm sure Mike will say this, but those behind the network are very keen that we are inclusive and do hear from all sorts of potential constituents, whether you be an archivist in museums, an academic, a researcher of any sort, so archive user and so on. So Mike is the Sector Development Manager at the National Archives for the Midlands, Transport and Schools. So I'm impressed that he's taken on this task of starting this network when it's only one of his hats that he wears. So he's got a lot to do. As a graduate of Aberystwyth University, where he did his history undergraduate, his archives diploma and his PhD, he's got feet in all sorts of different camps on this one. So Mike, if I can hand over to you now, please.
Sure, thanks Mike. Thanks everybody for coming along this evening. Hopefully this will be interesting, entertaining and illuminative. Right, I'll just share my screen, if you can bear with me, and hopefully have this presentation. Does that show, Mike? Brilliant. Okay, there's actually two separate presentations this evening, a sort of before and after. So there will be a little sort of pause in between the two, but hopefully it should go without hitch. Okay, so as mentioned, two presentations. First one is about the National Archives networks, my own work and how I came to sort of think about this network. It's very much based on a presentation that was supposed to be presented last April at an event in the automotive sector, which never happened. And then the second presentation is about post-COVID and the formation of the network and where we are, what we're aiming to do. Background-wise, by training, I'm a medieval historian and an archivist, so transport is purely an interest of mine. And when the opportunity to take on transport portfolio as a sector, an area of focus arose, I sort of leapt up and volunteered straight away. So that's where this arose. But I've worked mostly in local authority archives for about 30 years before transferring to National Archives about 3.5 years ago. And then taking on transport a year after that. As part of this work, one of my jobs is contacting organisations that hold transport-related archives to offer support and assistance. And that involved travelling around to various institutions. By chance, a lot of these happen to be in the Midlands because of the automotive industry around Coventry area, and lots of railway heritage organisations as well. So I managed to talked to quite a few people without even going outside my area. And then when I took on transport of portfolio, I obviously travelled further, so down to sort of Bewley and places like that. I also established contact with some related organisations, some academics, but more of that later. So, as mentioned, this first part was actually prepared for the Society of Automotive Historians in Britain last April. And at that point, the network hadn't been established. It was a sort of trying to drum up ideas, support, enthusiasm. So it describes the situation as it was, the background and the like. So here we go. I'll skip through some of the slides because they're not relevant anymore, but you'll get a flavour of what was the thinking at the time. So as mentioned, there'll be a lot about National Archives, about networks in general, and then moving on to the ideas of a land transport initiative. For those who are not aware of us, the National Archives is a non-ministerial department and the official archive of the government. But we're also the lead body for the archive sector in England. I sit in a department called Archive Sector Development, which is very much the outward-facing part of the organisation. It took on the functions of the Historical Manuscripts Commission and a few other bodies when the National Archives was formed. So we don't look after the records ourselves. We are there to advise, support, publicise, administer funding schemes, training, all those sort of things. And within that department, I sit in a team called Regional Networks Team, and we're even more outward facing in that we're actually based in our regions, and we spend most of our time travelling around visiting offices and organisations on the ground. So most of us have a region we cover, but we also take on various areas of focus such as science and technology or charities, which gives us a chance to really connect with organisations that are either national or cover large areas by theme. We liaise with lots of other organisations on a national basis who are concerned with various elements. So people like Arts Council England obviously look after museums, so there's links there. The lottery people, museum development organisations, research libraries, and so on. So we advise all sorts of organisations, not just local authorities, but universities, schools, businesses, charities, communities, museums, religious groups, private owners, pretty much any organisation or group that holds archives and wants to know how to look after them. We're very, very keen on networks because it's a way of meeting lots of people in one go, and it saves an awful lot of one-to-one individual travelling when certain things can be actually done en masse. So we actively encourage them and participate in as many networks as we can. So on one hand, there's regional ones. These are mainly archival based and have often evolved out of what used to be the regional archives councils, which were set up about 1999 and then fizzled out pretty much when MLAC was abolished in 2011. Some of them evolved, some of them took up different areas. But we're also interested in thematic networks, covering things like films, historic houses, charities, schools, and science and technology. And one of the things we do is support the creation of collaborative networks of archive services or other organisations so they can put together their knowledge, their skills, their resources, and hopefully the outcome is greater than the sum of the parts. There's a variety of these been emerging over the last few years. Charm is a good example, covering the charity network. They produce resources, they've got a website, and they're actively developing training and cross-fertilising ideas. So I won't go into too much detail on this, but basically there's some of the benefits and some of the outcomes of networks. And basically we feel it's worth resourcing and fostering and encouraging these networks because they can do an awful lot. And it gets over the isolation that many organisations, particularly in the transport heritage sector, might find. And quite often there's one volunteer who's been nominated rather than volunteered to look after the records of that organisation, doesn't know, have a clue what to do, how best to go about things. So knowing there's somebody out there who you can phone up, call, email, ask for advice, that's what we're aiming for. So as an example, I'm going to talk about the Aviation and Aerospace Archives Initiative, which was set up about a year before the land transport one, and very much acts as a sort of model for our starting point. But before even that, I'll go into quickly Maritime Shipbuilding, because this is even more established. There was once, it's pretty much gone now, but the Naval and Maritime Libraries and Archives Group, and also a Maritime Curators Group. And they sort of fizzled out a bit, but there's now the UK Maritime Heritage Network, which is one of ACE's subject specialist networks. And it includes our curators, but also archivists. And it's a chance for them to meet up once a year and discuss things. So they meet up annually at the UK Maritime Heritage Forum. And as part of this whole programme, I attended a workshop on shipbuilding records at the National Maritime Museum in October 2019. And again, it gave some ideas about how people can come together and share ideas. There is an inland waterways heritage network which exists, and I'll come back to inland waterways later. Publications. So, moving on to aviation. This is very much a brainchild of my colleague Tim, who looks after science and technology, who was in discussion with the Royal Aeronautical Society Library and a few others. And they realised there was an awful lot of volunteer-run museums run by individuals, groups, who had really significant collections that nobody really knew about, and they're often unsure how to look after them. So they thought about, how can people find out about these organisations, and how can they find out about best practice? So there was an initial scoping meeting down at the helicopter factory down in Yeovil, which is a fascinating tour. If you ever get the chance to have a look around there. And representatives from some of the key players in the aviation sector, including sort of Aviation Heritage UK and the Air Britain Trust, who include a lot of the museums under their umbrella, and a lot of researchers. The Business Archive Council has lots of experience in surveying records of specific sectors, so that was useful to get them on board as well. We had another meeting in April 2019, and it really got going from there. So it was decided to form the group, and it was quite informal. So there was a sort of steering group of just the willing, and then 3 work streams are set up: conference, documentation, and surveying. The conference was held, fortunately, January last year in Bristol, just before things blew up. And we had over 100 attendees. Luckily, we had some funding and a free space to hold it. But it went really well. Loads of different people attended, lots of different talks, whole range of things to do with collections, looking after them. We even had the archivist from Boeing on a video recording talking. It was a really good event. The documentation group, of which I participated, set out to create a sort of suite of documentation that would help practitioners look after their collections and promote them and do the best with them without too many resources, without worrying too much about standards. It's just really pragmatic. So developed a suite of documentation there, which was launched at that conference. And then the surveying group set out to discover how best to gather information that was holding all these different organisations. Their first project was to build up a database related to manufacturers, not even going into components. And that was launched quite recently online. And again, acts as a sort of good example of how we might proceed moving forwards. They built a website and carrying on surveying work, and hopefully at some point there'll be another conference when we're all allowed in the same room together. And they got their own website there. If anybody's interested, we can share the links. But if you type in aviation history, you'll find it online. So that was the aviation, and it got me thinking. Waterways are covered okay. Land transport, not so much. What do we do? And I started thinking about the different types of things that could be covered. And initial thoughts: road, rail, trams, few horses, easy, nothing to worry about. 5-minute job. It wasn't. And started thinking about the potential interest that might be out there. So manufacturers, commercial operators, both current and sort of in the past. Heritage operators, all sorts of things, from heritage lines to people running historic buses, all gathering documentation. Local authority and university archives with records relating to transport. It could be to do with bridges or passenger transport or railway companies. Museums of all type, not just those specifically related to transport, but local authority museums and community museums tend to gather all sorts of material, including transport material. Heritage sites, some of them have a transport element to them. Interest groups and societies, of which, having created a database or started a database, I know there's literally thousands of them, relating to localities, particular railway companies, bus companies, types of vehicle, you name it. There's a society out there, and I keep finding more and more all the while. Then we move to publishers, loads of publishers involved in transport history, and then individuals who are just interested either because of their own collection or because they're carrying out research. Then moving it on to the individuals, there's obviously archivists whose whole job is to look after documents. But current businesses and operators will be creating documentation that will be of interest moving forwards and needs looking after. A lot of museums hold archives, and the curators have got museum training, but they're not always sure about how to look after documents. There is separate work we're doing to help them as a sector, but particularly want to appeal to those with transport collections. There's an awful lot of volunteers out there who look after archive collections doing brilliant work, and it'd be good to get sort of them on board. There's collectors of material, and as mentioned, authors and researchers. So the potential sort of constituency of this network is vast. So then I started thinking, do we need two networks, one for road, one for rail? As at that time I thought they're the two key constituencies. The advantage and disadvantage of both. Obviously, if you split it into two, you've got people who are a bit more focused on the collections, the knowledge, the networks already, and know people. So that would work. Unfortunately, where do you draw the line? railway companies owned freight vehicles and buses and the like. It would obviously dilute resources, but more important is doubling the work, particularly for me. And there'd be a smaller pool of potential participants. So I was hoping that people would go for one network. So as mentioned, hopefully it would cover most forms of transport without any artificial split. The disadvantage is there's no existing umbrella group, so I have to sort of contact lots of different places to get a pool of interested people. And where do you host any outputs? Then thinking about what he could possibly do, based on experiences from aviation, there's obviously a need out there for practical advice for custodians, a forum for sharing advice, issues, questions. I got this collection, where's the best home for it? Peer support, absolutely vital for lots of individuals look after collections on their own, just need somebody to talk to about issues. Potential for conferences, meetings, training events moving forwards. A website would be useful, some sort of newsletter or social media. Surveying work, so loads of possibilities, including things not even thought of at that time. So at the stage I thought, let's get some interested people, gather them together, have an initial meeting, talk things through, see what they want to do. I could offer a venue down at Kew, help sort of in a limited way, and we'll see how we go. So at this point I thought, ask people what they think and see what happened. So that was where we were this time last year. Okay, so I'll just switch presentations. You can bear with me a second. I need to find a different one. This one here. Okay, is that showing people? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So 1 year ago today, almost to the hour, I was on a train travelling back from Kew, having left all my stuff on my desk, including my laptop. I plan to be back in a fortnight's time. I haven't been back yet. By Friday evening, things were kicking off. Certainly by next week, sites were closing, meetings have been cancelled, chaos reigned. How do you organise a network in that sort of situation? How do I give the presentation I've just shown you? It got worse, lockdown kicked in, whole new world. No site visits, no travelling, no meetings, no presentations, people on furlough, other people totally preoccupied with keeping sites running, organisations viable. A whole new world. So what should I do? So first of all, I sat with the internet and a spreadsheet and just started finding organisations out there. The hundreds I've mentioned, including hundreds I've probably not come across yet. Finding contact details online, trawling the websites, see which ones might be holding archives, if they got a name contact or a site, prioritising them for contacting at some point in the future. Still meeting people virtually, by phone, by video link, including some new people. Meanwhile, as a department, we're getting used to virtual events using Zoom and Teams and tools like that, as were the wider sector. And as time went on, it was clear things were dragging on. No physical gathering was going to be possible at all. So do I put all this on hold for a while, or do we just go for it? So with my manager's encouragement, we decided, let's do it. So I sent out emails to people I knew in the sector. Some replied straight away going, yeah, let's go for it. Other people I've still not heard back from. They're probably on furlough, have been, they're just not contactable, but they're on my list of potentials. I I've been doing a bit of work with Mike Asbestor earlier at the beginning of the year. So I contacted him. He's got contacts in the academic world, so that's spread another people around. And the more and more I thought about it, I thought it's not just road and rail. We got tractors, we got fairground rides, we got horses, all sorts of things. So I had a meeting with Guy and Ollie at the Museum of English Rural Life, and they came up with some fantastic ideas and connections, and it just opened up the whole realm of possibilities. Got even scarier the more I thought about it. We started getting to the logistics, building stuff, everything. At this point, I knew I got a big task on my hands, so I coopted a couple of colleagues who worked in business and with technology, and then thought about how to balance the road and rail, archivists, curators, professionals, non-professionals, researchers, enthusiasts, all these potential interests, to try and balance things out so that everybody had an equal voice and a sort of consensus would emerge without being dominated by one particular group or institution. Sorted out a date, and moved on from there. A little digression. I showed you this slide earlier, so that was my initial thinking: road, rail, a few horses, perhaps a few bikes. The more and more you dig into the internet, the murkier things become. Starting thinking about, it's not just England, which is my remit. Railway lines cross borders. Ferries used to connect to Ireland. Same companies own railways over there. People move around. Goods move around. So, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, are they in scope? Is beyond in scope. And then, in terms of vehicles, you got horse sleds, hovercraft, and even the rotary tiller. That it propels, it moves along. Is it a form of transport? People are interested in. I found websites devoted to flymos, so anything's out there. As it turns out, we've had a fantastic range of participants well beyond road and rail. So some examples there from sort of brewery centre, who've got a moving keg, fairground archive, tanks, RAF ancillary vehicles, cycles, and even the Historical Metallurgy Society, who I'd not even heard of about 3 weeks ago. They're on board, really keen, because transport uses metal in all sorts of ways, and there's a lot that both sides can learn from each other. So got really wide interest already. The one big elephant in the room at the moment is Canals. Obviously they float, and they are kind of covered by the existing networks, but they cut through the land. The horses that pull the barges in the past walk on the land, so they're still to be determined. I'm waiting for a new archivist to be appointed up at Ellesmere Port, at which point we'll have a conversation with them. If they want to join us, they can. I haven't got a problem with that. So in terms of virtual meetings, first one was last August, and 10 people gathered together. I thought I'm doing well there. Second one, November 17. The last one, 33, is blossoming. As people get to know about it, people get really enthusiastic. I've probably got about 60 people on the main list at the moment, and it's growing all the time. The first 2 meetings were mainly taken up with planning matters, just deciding what on earth we're going to do with this network. We've met up, what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? But by the 3rd meeting, there was enough things in place and also enough interest to actually sort of move on to actual content to interest people. So this time round, we had 3 small presentations on a huge range of subject matter. So we had Transport for London talking about how they coped during the pandemic and moved to online work and resources. A lady from the Fairground Archive talking about how they use transport to move around. And then a chap from the Merchant Navy Preservation, I always get it wrong, sorry. The Merchant Navy Class Preservation Society talked about rescuing the archive of the society and how it's moving forward in the future. So trying to get a balance of interest, and hopefully that's the way the network will move forward in the future, combining a bit of business with actually learning about people, what they do, and a chance then to share experiences and questions. We've set up a very small surveying subgroup, of which Mike's part, and I'm very grateful for his knowledge. And we've had 2 planning meetings together and gathered some volunteers and drawn up a taxonomy. So we've got some ideas about what to do. So moving back slightly, it was decided at the beginning one network was the way forward, which was great. And people decided they didn't do one interest groups with it, they just wanted one thing. And people's interests were wider than I even expected. And the railway people are interested in land, the land people are interested in railways, and everything's great. We came up with a few ideas for names and chose one, so Eltan was born. And in terms of definition, basically, if you think you're in scope, you probably are. I'm not going to exclude anybody. I don't think anybody wants to exclude anybody. If they think their interests are relevant to any form of land transport, any type of land transport at all, then you're welcome. And it became sort of very clear that geographical limits not relevant either. Again, if they're interested, great, not a problem. The archives group had set up some terms of reference, which I unashamedly nicked since my colleague who sits 2 desks away from me drew them up. Adapted them slightly, and they act as a sort of a basis, almost the constitution of the group. I mean, it's not formally constituted at all, but it sets out the aims of what we want to do, really. They're not set in stone, they can be adapted in the future if needed, but it gives scope for a range of work as resources and volunteers allow. I should say there's actually no resourcing whatsoever to this group, so it's totally reliant on voluntary efforts. And we recognise that it'll be by small steps and incremental, but hopefully bit by bit we'll gather together some nice resources that will be useful. The terms of reference are quite long, but I've highlighted in red sort of the key bits, and I'll just read those out. So mutual support network, that's crucial really. Create a website, a directory of contacts. Promote good record keeping practice, so best practice. A forum which to discuss things. Map existing archive documentation. Publicise resources for research. Identify significant gaps in existing documentation. You know, is there stuff out there we don't know about yet? Identify suitable repositories, so make sure the collections get suitable homes. Identify archives at risk, companies going bankrupt, people dying, we've got collections in the lofts, you just don't know what happened out there. So set up procedures so that these things can be identified, rescued, and find homes for them. Promote sources of funding, always tricky, but we can try. Create new partnerships and strengthen existing ones. So there's lots of networks I've come across which I'm sort of joining in with, and they're joining in with us. Up in Scotland, you've got Stick, which is a great organisation. We've come across it. And just be a champion for the sector, really, and stress the importance of archives. So that's roughly what we're up to. In terms of organisation, there's no formal committee at this stage, no officers, no constitution, no bank account, no nothing. There's me doing it as part of my day job, convening it, and everything else is just voluntary and looking together. We've settled on having meetings quarterly moving forwards, and at the moment, for obvious reasons, they're all virtual, but at some point it would be nice to have some physical meetings, moving around the country, visiting sites, because you can learn so much from actually seeing somebody's storage and their facilities. You can learn about their problems, you can offer suggestions. In the longer term, we probably do need to become a bit more formal, because as soon as you start applying for grants to do projects, you need a bank account, which means the constitution and elected officers. So, but at the moment, we're keeping it fairly low key and informal. One of my jobs over the Christmas break was to set up a a website, which I've done there, ltan.info. That was purely because ltan.org wasn't available for some unknown reason. I've not come across the info suffix before, but it sounded quite appropriate because it's a site for information about transport. It's purely on WordPress, so it's not earth-shattering, but I've tried to create a sort of clean, professional look. There's a logo, it's colour-coded, there's some images contributed by sort of participants. If anybody else has got any images they want on there that copyright fine, feel free to send them to me, because a lot of them are just ones I found on my hard drive when I was desperate for pictures. At the moment, we've not got a single picture of an archive on there, even a document, so that will change in time. One of the first things to do was to adapt the guidance that had been created for the aviation sector and just adapt it slightly so it's relevant to land transport, and that's up there now. So it's available to anybody for free, and they can hopefully learn things from that. And it's something to point people towards if they're after advice. I pulled some stats off yesterday, and so far we've reached 27 countries. Obviously, the UK is the prime sort of destination of traffic, but there's a fair bit of interest from English-speaking countries and sort of neighbouring countries, but further afield or so, I mean, possibly accident, but you can see the sort of the spread of interest there, and hopefully that will continue as time goes by. I was reluctant at first to do anything to do with social media just because of the time it takes, but at the last meeting somebody suggested we ought to do something, so I set up a Twitter account 10 days ago, and 50 followers within an hour. I was really pleased with that. 111 yesterday, so it's really taken off. So thank you everybody who's joined that group, and do sort of pass it on to people. And the way Twitter works, it just spreads, so that's great. And it's a way of getting information out there informally, quickly, to people who wouldn't be formally engaged with the organisation. On a sort of more formal basis, Guy at Merle set up a Gistmail account, which hopefully moving forward will be the forum for exchanging information, ideas, questions. It's not really kicked off yet, but hopefully will over time. There's about 20 people signed up to that so far, mainly in the academic and professional side of things, which tends to be the audience for Gistmail anyway. I mentioned surveying a bit back, so a lot of planning going on, and we've developed a fairly comprehensive taxonomy. I say comprehensive, but we're adding new things all the while. It's amazing how many things spring to mind. It was based on quite a few existing classification schemes, but already it's grown well beyond those. The work of surveying needs to be realistic. There's nobody going to be working on this even part-time. It's literally just spare time, and it's purely voluntary. So if we can get some quick hits, that's good. Ideally, it needs to be useful and unique. There's no point replicating what's been done before. We are in touch with now 2 people who've been involved in the form of TRAP project, so we can incorporate information from that. There's other people who've done sort of surveying of particular sectors, so they're on board in their sort of areas of comfort. So moving forward, we can hopefully sort of do some specific parts of the sector and show what the potential is for other parts. Hopefully we can use the high level information to direct people to relevant institutions, and if possible we'll try and link to the Discovery Catalogue at the National Archives, partly because there's a thing called Find an Archive on there which contains contact details of organisations, so why duplicate that? But partly also because organisations can host their catalogues on there for free if they want to, and it all ties in together. So anything we can do to just link to other resources rather than having to create vast amounts of information ourselves and house it on a non-existent web portal, all the better, really. So in terms of spreading the word, we've got the website now, which is the main shop window to point people towards. Word of mouth by members has been brilliant. Before the Twitter account even existed, Mike and I used the #LTAN hashtag just for a few guerrilla postings to say, yes, this is emerging, keep an eye out. And we've obviously got the Twitter now. I've been using my own work mailing lists, both regionally and transport related, to spread the word. Using the Archives NRA listserv, which is a forum used by most archivists in the country now. So putting information on there. People have asked for copy to be put in some society newsletters. So I've sent out and circulated that. I'm in a couple of the industrial heritage networks, so they offered to host information. So I said, yeah, can you put this on? That's fair enough, yeah, go for it. And most of all, this webinar. So hopefully I've reached some new people today and told you a bit about what's going on. So vision for the future. Primarily that it survives and gathers pace and becomes self-sustaining. I'd like it to take on its own identity and agenda. I don't want to be the leader of it. I'm just giving birth to it. It's very much up to the participants what direction it will take, and hopefully, I'll be able to step back at some point. It'd be great at some point if it can take on enough formality to be able to do grant-assisted projects, which would really sort of move things forwards, either in terms of events or in terms of the website and its resources. But hopefully it'll have a positive reputation, get known within the sector as the place to go to for information. And hopefully there'll be a bank of resources created in the next few years, which will be there for everybody to use, whether they're a custodian or a researcher. As mentioned, it'd be great if I can step back and spend some time on schools or something at some point in the work life. So was it worth the effort? Absolutely. Of all the people I contacted about it, only one person's been negative. Really enthusiastic reception in a lot of circles. So it's a case of maintaining the momentum and gathering more people on board, really. So to finish off, there's a few sort of links